you looking for a different level of truth about your challenges and struggles? Then be a part of the Yes and podcast, hosted by empowerment strategist and trauma specialist Jennifer Whitaker. Every Wednesday, we challenge conventional thinking on topics like trauma, healing, and so much more. Learn life lessons and great nuggets of wisdom from guests who've moved through their pain and suffering to discover a new purpose in life. Now, here's your host, Jennifer Whitaker.
Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Whitaker, and you are watching and listening to this week's episode of Yes And. Our guest this week is Alyssa Gursky. Alyssa is a night attendant at MAPS, and MAPS is one of the organizations that is currently conducting clinical trials for the MDMA studies to treat treatment-resistant PTSD. Alyssa is also finishing her master's degree in clinical mental health counseling with a concentration in transpersonal art therapy at Naropa University in Colorado. And she currently lives in Denver, where she is designing programming for psychedelic integration and psychedelic-assisted art therapy. Alyssa, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting. Most of my listeners know, just from hearing past episodes or from watching me be a guest on other shows, that I've been through some of my own psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy treatments. Mm-hmm. And I'm really excited to have you on here to talk about non-ordinary states of consciousness today.
It is definitely my most favorite topic, so I'm happy to chat about it as well.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about why it's so exciting for you.
That is such an awesome question. I feel like I remember being a small child and accessing non-ordinary states through like hanging upside down on monkey bars, holding my breath. Like I've always been interested in practices that shift my consciousness. Mm-hmm. So I got especially interested in psychedelic medicines when I was a teenager. Mm-hmm. I think I must have been about 16 when somebody, I had symptoms of depression at that age, and someone had said, like, you know, you'd be interested in mushrooms. You should like look into those. And I had a really powerful experience with them. Mm-hmm. And I actually published a story about it with Symposia. Mm-hmm. They're a psychedelic news organization online. Published my first psychedelic experience with them. But after that, I remember looking up, like, do people use this in therapy? Like, this was so therapeutic. So I must have been 17 when I did that. Mm-hmm. And then it just became a straight arrow of, I picked up my life, I'd say in November, the month of November, I decided that in January, I was going to move out to Colorado. Mm-hmm. Because I knew that in Boulder, there was Naropa University, which offers degrees in transpersonal psychology at the undergraduate and graduate level. Mm-hmm. And I knew that MAPS had sites in Colorado. Mm-hmm. So I said, I'm just going to pick up my life and move and hope for the best. And about half a decade later, I've been pretty involved in psychedelic research since then, supported in any way I can with the night attendant job, as you shared. And I've just been building community out here and helping others get a leg up into this world and finding my mentors. But it's really just been a straight shot since my first psychedelic experience. But yeah. As an art therapist, I've always had a passion for the expressive arts. Mm-hmm. And as an art therapist, art induces an unordinary state of consciousness because your habitual mind kind of goes offline because the unconscious gets to speak. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to say more about that, but.
Yeah. Well, and I love when you talk about non-ordinary states of consciousness, you're talking about like even remembering when you were a little kid and you would hold your breath. And holding your breath and, you know, like bracing the bandhas is something that happens in Kundalini yoga to create non-ordinary states. Exactly. And I've not studied specifically holotropic breath work. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, there's some similarities there in the breath work getting into non-ordinary states. Hanging upside down with the blood flow to the head can create a non-ordinary state. So think our listeners, and I think the average person, is way more familiar with non-ordinary states of consciousness than they actually realize.
Yes. Dreaming is even another great example.
Mm-hmm.
Dreaming is such a strong example of non-ordinary states.
Yeah.
I have a dear friend who uses cold exposure
Mm-hmm.
as a method for accessing non-ordinary states as well.
Yes, that goes in alignment with Wim Hof.
Exactly. Yeah. He's
Yeah.
actually he's trained by Wim, works with Wim. Like it is very much that lineage. And it's that I find it so fascinating that we could change the rhythm of our breath, change our temperature,
Mm-hmm.
and access non-ordinary states. That's how much human beings are wired
Mm-hmm.
for
Yes.
spaces.
Yes, absolutely. And there are non-ordinary states the average person accesses every single day. So, like how many of our listeners drink caffeine?
Yeah.
Because it changes how you perceive the world, or they go home and they have a glass of wine, or, a craft beer, or, again, all ways to alter our perception of the world around us.
Yeah. And what even is, I love Stan Groff in particular, because his discourse around the phrase non-ordinary states is so specific.
Mm-hmm.
Because what is actually ordinary consciousness?
Good question.
What actually is a baseline? Are we always in some sort of fluctuation of embodiment and dissociation? And what actually? I'm not sure I'm actually familiar with what an ordinary state of consciousness is.
I know, right? I'm not sure that I am either, because I'm with you. Just knowing, I tend to focus on developmental and ancestral trauma in the work I do. Yeah. And with those issues, there is a lot of dissociation, because so much happened in that pre-verbal state that, it's really easy to get into the ADD phase and just kind of pop out and pop back in and pop out and pop back in. And and ADD is related to early childhood trauma.
Yes. Working at Innate Path, the clinic in Denver that I work at, some of my coworkers have really helped illuminate that for me, that attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are just symptoms of unresolved childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So Alyssa, tell me a little bit more about the art therapy that you're learning about, and how and why having a creative practice in our life. Why is art therapy and having creativity in our lives so darn important?
There's so many avenues I can go with that, so I will try to keep myself on a narrow path. I recently had a mentor say to me that we are always using our creative energy. It's just if the shadow gets it or the light gets it. When we let our lightness, our consciousness take our creative energy, that's where we can create manifestation. We can create art, speaking in a physical sense. We can create our community, relationships, like the act of creating and bringing new, whether it's tangible, relational, into the world, is, what that sacral chakra is about. But if we're not present with our creative energy, the shadow then gets it, which to me, how I'm understanding that is, for me, it looks like creating stories, creating false narratives.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're not consciously creating, we're unconsciously creating something else. The creative energy is still getting used in our system. It's just to our detriment. I don't know how much listeners are familiar with the concept of the shadow, but the parts of ourselves that we don't really want to relate to, childhood patterns that are unresolved, that haven't yet gotten a chance to learn that we're adults and that we don't need to be protected. In terms of internal family systems, which is a modality that I really resonate with, Richard Schwartz calls them exiles. Parts that we just have completely locked away. If we're not, our highest self isn't taking our creativity and running with it, the shadow parts get it. So creativity, creates mental sanity for so many reasons. But art therapy in particular is a really young discipline. It's only I mean, the American Art Therapy Association is just now having their 50th conference. So they've only been less than 100 years we've been a legitimate field, to the best of my knowledge. So it's a discipline. There are two main avenues of art therapy. There's art psychotherapy, which means art is used as a diagnostic tool. I currently work in a children's hospital in Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
As a medical art therapist. So I'm working with kiddos who are either in day treatment programs or in long-term care because they're too medically unstable to be in their homes or too medically unstable to be in schools. And there, it's a lot of just teaching regulation, a lot of helping diagnose if a child only has partial use of one side of their body. How can art assess more than verbally, especially if they're nonverbal? How can art assess their ability? Using art materials to gauge either physical well-being or mental well-being. But then there's the lineage that I really resonate with on a soul level, which is art as therapy.
Okay.
Art process is inherently therapeutic, and our psyche is full of latent content, whether that be our symbols, certain art materials that we resonate with. Everything has a metaphorical quality. Whatever is happening in our psyche will be drawn to that. So, for example, currently I've been very overwhelmed in my third year of graduate school. So I've been instinctually drawing towards mediums that are rigid because that aligns with my need for containment and control.
Okay.
So working with ink, for example, is something it's neat. I'm finding myself doing this with my hands to contain.
Yeah, I see that. My tracker is kicking in and I'm watching your gestures.
My tiny sphere. I make a lot of mandalas, so that's pretty accurate for me.
Yeah.
But whatever symbols, I mean, in the most fun part of my job, I get to unearth people's inner mythology and help them see it on paper.
Yeah.
My whole thought on the intersection of psychedelics and art therapy is psychedelics show us a different part of our internal landscape.
Yes.
And art therapy helps us create a map for our landscape.
Ah, I love that. Yes.
Right? So the combination of the two, it just seems that one, from a diagnostic lens, we can track our progress and our process with expressive therapies. After a session, that's a lot of what we're working on in the Nate Path is how can art, number one, help people integrate? How can it help people ground after a session and bring home the lessons?
And that, I want to pause you right there for a moment because that is so stinking and important. And that was what was lacking for a lot of years just in traditional therapy, was the lack of something to help me process and integrate what came up over the years. And I think there are some ways that CBT made me worse because there wasn't that support of integration and processing.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful point.
Yeah. So I just want to pause and really pull that out. You can go on now.
Excellent. On a really similar note, I deeply respect my team because we practice a bottom-up approach, meaning that, top down is what you just named, CBT.
Exactly.
We're going to take the psychological content and modify it with patterns just enough to create a difference in state change. And it's not that CBT doesn't help people, because I think it's a really beautiful and special modality, but it's really great for management. I think that for trauma work, dealing with what is in the body, working bottom up,
yes,
working with the psyche, the nervous system, and then witnessing changes that happen.
Yes.
That is where I have seen in my own body deep transformation, and that's why I feel committed to offering bottom-up work as a therapist, mostly.
Yes. So I would like to run this by you. I didn't plan on doing this, but I think this will be interesting to the conversation. I have just this summer started explaining all these different parts and pieces to my clients very differently. So when it comes to the implicit mind, the body, the tissue memory, I call that our experiencer. When it comes to the subconscious mind, the dreams, the visions, the daydreams, I call that our visionary. When it comes to the cognitive mind, I call that the our narrator. They make up the stories. And then we really want our butt in the seat of the observer, which is like our higher self. Some people, I think, call that higher self God, or the God voice, or the higher power, or great spirit. And the observer that is inside the head, if it can keep the three kids in alignment, then we have balance and peace within ourselves. And the narrator cannot change with words the feelings of the experiencer or the visions of the subconscious or the visionary. It can't change those images. So we have to get all of them to work together. So art therapy, if you are feeling something as the art is coming out, then and if the narrator can integrate a story into what's coming out, integrate the story into the art, then you've got everything online and everything starts to come together and get integrated. So I'm just curious, like, again, this is a new way and I'm still fleshing it out on if this is even a good way to explain it. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I love that. Breaking down the mind in such a succinct way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's just like a bolded, all capital yes for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, because it is really important to make a distinguishing boundary between these parts of self.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when we realize the narrator has gotten the seat for so long, what about the body?
Exactly.
What was for the body?
Mm-hmm.
The visionary?
The subconscious mind I call the visionary, because that's where our dreams come from, is from the subconscious. It's the implicit mind that experiences the world. That's our sensation and emotion.
Yeah.
The tissue memory, that's what gets imprinted in the nervous system. So as a somatic experiencing therapist, that's what I track when I'm watching these little gestures, because that's the implicit mind a lot of times that brings the gestures in.
That's a lot of the work that we do at Innate Path. It's really interesting. So Peter Levine's original dissertation was taken and then ran with and modified, and that's how we got our modality.
Mm-hmm.
So it does feel it's in the same realm of I'm tracking the body and the nervous system, holding everything that is light and shadow.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And I love that you keep talking about shadow. I've said on the show in the past that, and I believe this, according to Carl Jung, the shadow is 90% golden. We are afraid of our shadow. Those are the places that we don't want to go. And who was it that, I think it was Joseph Campbell, that said that cave that you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. Or that might be a misquote, but maybe not exact words, but that's the gist of it. And it's so true. A lot of times we are afraid of our gifts. We're afraid of our light. We're afraid of our talents and sharing our creativity.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The more that I learn about trauma work, especially having the juxtaposition of at the children's hospital working with traumatized children, and then at MAPS getting the experience of watching traumatized children who grew up now then attempt to heal those traumatized parts, seeing a wounded child in their child form and then a wounded child in adult form. It seems so clear that all of our shadow is just was a protection, was trauma that developed at a young age. So much compassion the highest self can hold for those parts that without doing shadow work, I have a dear friend who uses the expression soul calories.
I got to write that down.
Yeah. I don't know if you met Genevieve Wood at Kazam.
I did.
Yes, she's somebody you should definitely have on as a guest. She is prolific, absolutely prolific.
I have her card. I need to reach out to her again.
Yes, I cannot speak highly enough of that human.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
There's this expression of we only have a certain amount of soul calories, meaning that we can only manifest and create and exist and be in our power for so long. And the more shadow work that we do, the more that we can befriend our young wounded parts, the more of those soul calories that we get back. So that, though it's very an esoteric concept, it makes such grounded sense. Because I feel like as a professional, I sit between worlds of this medical art therapy, even though I'm in a field like art therapy, I'm in a very clinical, westernized version of it.
Right.
And then the other side of me is deeply steeped in like 2 degrees in transpersonal psychology, psychedelic work. So I love theories and expressions that feel all encompassing for people who are spiritually curious, are on their own healing path, but don't exactly identify as spiritual. So that's a concept that for me teeters on both worlds of like, yeah, if I eat more calories than my body needs, I'm going to be exhausted. If I try to do more than I physically can do, I'm going to be exhausted.
Right.
And the same goes for the spiritual. If I am not pushing myself hard enough, or I'm pushing myself too hard, I'm going to be spiritually fatigued.
Yes.
And shadow work, I believe, expands our capacity for that so greatly. Yes, that must be really up for me today.
Yeah. So do you mind talking for a minute or two about what does shadow work look like to you? Like when you're doing shadow work, because it sounds scary.
I like that grounded question. Shadow work. For me, I've been through a lot of pretty big transitions in this last year. I've lost a lot of core friends. I've gone through a pretty serious relationship transition, moved to a new city, and in conflict is where I find my shadow work best emerges. Vulnerability on this podcast right now.
Yeah.
Shadow work emerges when I receive feedback, and it's maybe feedback about ways that I was a little careless or not kind or anything less than my best self. Or sometimes with close trusted friends processing these big situations, conflicts that are happening, and asking for the feedback of, do you see my blind spots? And when I get that feedback, if I can express gratitude that somebody wants to see my growth and transformation. So stopping the activation process of I'm under attack and my community doesn't love me because I'm bad. Pausing, expressing gratitude for their care, even if it's coming from like an anger-fueled or an upset place, but taking it to the art. Really for me, somatic awareness and art is really big for me. So exploring what happens in my body when somebody gives me the feedback that, let's think. I received feedback that I was perceived as being selfish. So I took time to explore, what does being selfish mean? If I was to make art about that, what colors would I use? What material would I use? And I basically let myself be my own art therapist. And it's accessible for all people because art materials have inherent metaphor. Like my degree is trained in helping people heal, but that doesn't mean that I'm the only one who gets access to understanding the metaphor. So I just want to let your listeners know that building metaphoric relationship with art materials is really accessible. It's medicine for all people.
Yes.
So for me, it could look like letting myself unconsciously choose a modality in that deep vulnerability, and then making art and reflecting on it afterwards. So during that time, I did a lot of watercolor pieces.
Okay.
Which you can think about watercolor being hard to control. There's a fluidity, there's an ambiguity, there's a wetness, which is pretty emotionally based.
And water is representative of emotion too. The element is.
Exactly. And art materials follow such an archetypal. So shadow work looks like giving myself time to sit with feedback and say, what if this is reality?
Yeah.
What if reality is that I am this, there's a part of me that is kind of a jerk. What is it like to accept that reality and give that piece form?
Yeah.
So once it has physical form, I can dialogue with it. And one of, I think, Joseph Campbell's students was James Hillman. I'm pretty sure James Hillman was Joseph Campbell or Carl Jung's student, but he's a Jungian practitioner. Okay. He's dense, but so adept in metaphor and working with symbols. Mm-hmm. He has this idea of something called gadgets, which are ways that a person can interact with image. Mm-hmm. So in my training, we believe that image has its own autonomy. Mm-hmm. So if I make a drawing, sure, it came from me, but it's its own being. Mm-hmm. I can look at it and be like, okay, this is a representation of my shadow. And then I am engaging with a piece of it. Mm-hmm. And I really like a practice called imaginal dialogue, which is me having a conversation with it mm-hmm. and seeing what gifts my psyche can give me. Because I've learned I'm the third of two pretty big personalities, my siblings.
Okay.
They're wonderful, beautiful people, but I was definitely a quieter to myself child. Mm-hmm. And I learned in making art and engaging with this identity of selfishness that was just a protection mechanism. Mm-hmm. When I could see it and realize how developmentally young the art looked, I wish I had it accessible to share. But once I could see an artistic representation of how my body felt taking this feedback, it was like, oh man, this is like an 8-year-old kid. Mm-hmm. And I just was flooded with compassion, realizing that, yes, actually I was acting selfish. There was a selfish motivation, but it was from protection. Mm-hmm. Because then when I can see shadow work, you can see where the part is coming from. You can, it doesn't realize, I mean, in terms of IFS, the part doesn't realize that I'm a 23-year-old woman who is independent and has a career. It thinks we're 8 years old and we still live with our family.
Exactly.
So, shadow work is very heavily about just building relationship with wounded parts.
Yeah.
And giving them space. So for people, it could look like, I think journaling and image are really powerful ways of shadow work because you get to interface with them. Mm-hmm. The image, and either the image that you're creating in Word, the like narrative that you are creating, or the physical image itself has its own autonomy and then can be witnessed because then it's in the light.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And such a beautiful explanation. I've been doing some of my own shadow work as well. And I sometimes have to pause and remind myself that when I'm doing shadow work, it's not about necessarily what I do every day in my life. It's taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture and looking at myself and my life from a soul perspective, not from this physical body perspective, because there's so much more to who we are than just these physical bodies.
Yeah.
And so it is, I think it's important to take a step back. And I have a quick story if you have a moment for it.
Of course.
I had an experience earlier this year where I was practicing with a small group of people in a class that I was taking. And every time I would practice with one particular person, I would hear the word gaslighting just repeated in my head. And I was looking for evidence that this person was gaslighting me. I wasn't finding it. So my narrator convinced myself, ignoring the feeling that I was like that kind of sick feeling that I was getting in my gut every time I worked with this person. It was completely ignoring that every time I worked with this person, I was kind of feeling sick to my stomach. And my narrator said, oh no, this is your past trauma. You need to heal this. You need to force through this. You need to get through this and heal this aspect and realize that not everybody is doing this to you.
Yeah.
And what it came down to was when I really took a step back and picked it apart, I was ignoring an important gut feeling that was telling me, you need to speak up and resolve something because you don't feel safe with this particular person. There's something a little bit off. And I was actually gaslighting myself by convincing myself that I had to force through it. So I was causing myself to question my own reality. So that was me telling myself and I was projecting it at this other person for a period of time until I figured it out. And if I hadn't gone deeper into that experience, I would still be projecting and saying, oh yeah, that person just gaslights, stay away. And it wasn't that person at all. It was me ignoring my body signal and not paying attention to what was really happening in the moment. And when I started doing that, things got better. I was able to address the issue with everybody. I was able to apologize and say, oh my God, I didn't realize I was doing this. So I was very out in the open about it once I figured it out.
The world congratulates us and gifts us when we agree to be a conscious player.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We agree to actually be present with the game.
Mm-hmm.
We get rewarded so deeply when we actually can listen to the body.
Yes.
Yeah, that is my biggest thing I'm learning as a therapist is body awareness. So,
yes. I talk about our emotions with my clients in such a way as, if you think about what our emotions are trying to do, when we have what people label as negative emotions, and I use air quotes because I hate the label of negative, but you hear it all the time. What are they really trying to do? Anger, fear, sadness, grief, those things. What are they really trying to do? They're trying to send us a message. Something in the environment is giving us feedback, that's bringing up these emotions. Maybe you need to slow down and process this. If it's sadness or grief, or if it's anger, maybe that's a call to action. Or if it's fear, maybe we need to do some orienting and figure out, do I need to protect myself? What do I need to do here? When we ignore those, we could be letting things that could be harmful to us into our sphere. And the positive emotions are things that we want more of. Does that sound like any system in your body that tries to keep the bad things out and let the good things in? Sounds a little bit like the immune system, right?
Brilliant. Yes.
It's like our immune system for our psyche. So when we are not paying attention to our emotions, then we're letting all kinds of crap hit us that's not ours. And over time, that will absolutely manifest and affect the physical body.
That is the absolute. Emotional intelligence is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so lucky to be in conversation with people who value it as much as I do.
Mm-hmm.
Body awareness and emotional intelligence, because it's not an elitist thing that you need a master's degree or all of these trainings to do. It is so accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And just like slowing down and listening to your body.
Yes.
I could not agree more. And that's another reason why I deeply am an advocate and almost a missionary for creativity.
Mm-hmm.
That if practices like mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
Taking time out of your day to just listen in silence is so overwhelming for people, because let's face it, our society is so overstimulating.
Mm-hmm.
To just go from the internet and TV and even podcasts and books and all of these things that we're taking in to actually just not take in stimuli can be really overwhelming for people.
Yes.
So that's why I treasure art, because you're doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You are giving your psyche space to be heard and witnessed, but it's instead slow.
Mm-hmm.
And it is in action. You're still creating. There's still a movement, but it's. I think the tangibility makes it a little more easier to hear
Mm-hmm.
what's going on inside, to hear with your eyes,
Yes.
and to hear with your heart. And something I hear a lot in my work and with clients and with people that I meet is, I can only draw stick figures. I'm not an artist. And I'm like, cool, take a seat. I'm gonna pitch this to you really quick.
Mm-hmm.
Art is not about aesthetic. It is such a capitalist idea that art has to be sold, to be shared. I think I have a couple hundred pieces of art that no other eyes have ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably never will, because I make them to know myself, and I keep them to track my process long term.
Mm-hmm.
So
I love that you make art to know yourself.
exactly. And it is
Beautiful.
accessible. It is totally normal in this society to have that blockade of there's no time to make art. Making art is for kids. I can only draw stick figures, when it could be as simple as just like focusing on your breath, putting on a good playlist, putting on a good song,
Mm-hmm.
even for 3 minutes. And making, I love, as you saw with my hands, I love making the boundary of a circle
Mm-hmm.
because it's contained. And obviously there's a lot of historical archetypal relationship with mandalas,
Yes.
sacred circle.
Yes.
So I learned that if you start inward and work out, you're like working out, or you can work in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really amazing prompt for somebody who feels uncomfortable making art. Just take a plate, flip it over, make a circle on a piece of paper, and like let yourself fill that boundary.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you do it once a week, I mean, ideally once a day, either in the morning or in the night, just sitting down and letting either the day begin to see where you're at, or ending and closing it with an image. But it is such a powerful way to know yourself, to see what symbols are big for you. I go on like tirades of, I'll be drawing birds for weeks, and then I'll be looking through all of these different books to figure out what bird is it and what is coming up for me around the symbolism, and how can I integrate that into my daily life. Like, I started drawing birds, and then I found wild turkey feathers, and the universe was just gifting me this abundance for listening.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so much about trusting the elements and believing that I'm freer than I let myself think. Like, these powerful metaphors come through when I just sit down for 10 minutes a day and doodle, you know?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love that you talk about how these powerful metaphors come through. And I'm curious, do those relate to aha moments for you?
yes.
Yeah, because I talk about aha moments, and aha moments are not just thoughts. They're the thought combined with like a sensation. There is a felt sense to an aha moment. And
Yes.
whenever somebody has one of those, like, oh, and you like see the light bulb go on over their head, it's like there really truly is a felt sense to that. And things do shift and change whenever, again, you get the experiencer, the narrator, the visionary all on the same page. And I love the idea of drawing in your journals. Like, journals don't have to be just writing. You could doodle in your journal every day. I love that.
I have two different, I think I have 3 journals right now, but I have 2 within close proximity to me. And they all have different purposes. You know, some I track my meditation and my synchronicities that I experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's a magic practice that I abide by really strictly. And one is just for image.
Mm-hmm.
I have a therapy sketchbook, I have a school sketchbook, and I have my like magical documentation sketchbook. So I'm constantly, if I'm seen in public, odds are in my bag I have a sketchbook, 2 books that I'm reading, and some art material. I'm always prepared for anything.
That's awesome.
I'm prepared.
Yeah. What art material do you carry in your purse? I'm curious.
Currently it's been colored pencils. I've been wanting to provide myself with, trees.
Mm-hmm.
We were chatting before about earth and grounding, and colored pencils are great for that for me.
Yeah.
And I also got myself sometime last year a metallic watercolor set
Oh, fun.
for my inner child. She wanted it very badly. I use that a lot for her because she likes sparkles.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, I'm very I present as feminine, but I definitely can be a little more on the masculine side just in my presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And my inner child loves pink.
Mm-hmm.
And just loves sparkles, and sometimes I dip into that territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So can you just give a little definition of what you mean by inner child?
Oh my God, it is the golden light that is unbroken and untraumatized within every human.
Yeah.
That is the inner child for me, is my innate curiosity and my playfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's laughing with my friends and losing track of time. It's playing.
Mm-hmm.
It is letting myself feel safe. Inner children are deeply accessed through safety.
Yes.
You know, and for me, it took a lot of shadow work. It took a lot of being present with my wounded child to get to know my inner child.
Yes.
But I was lucky enough in my academic career to take a child and adolescent art therapy class where we got to make a gift for our inner child. We got to spend 15 weeks making a physical, what does your inner child need?
Nice.
I made her a weighted blanket to help her be in her body.
Mm-hmm.
And it's gorgeous. I would get it, but it weighs 20 pounds. It looks like a tree.
Nice.
So the fabric of it is bark, and the back of it is like a green fleece, flannel type material.
Mm-hmm.
And in discovering and like laying down and being put in my body through this weighted blanket, my inner child began to feel safe in my body again. And as I named before, I do imaginal dialogue practices with her.
Mm-hmm.
So it may look like writing a question in one color pen
Mm-hmm.
and asking what she needs and then letting her kind of write.
Mm-hmm.
I also recently heard about practices in the field of art therapy where you use your non-dominant hand
I do that sometimes.
to work with your inner child.
Yes.
Work with that
Mm-hmm.
small part, but
yeah. And we all have that aspect to us. And that's one thing I've learned in all of the trauma classes and trauma trainings I've taken over the years is that there is this really just pristine, innocent aspect to each and every one of us that lives within. And that's our authenticity. That's our true authentic self. And it's the truest expression of who we truly are as a being. And when you see people, like it saddens me when I see people who have lost their ability to play. And maybe because that was me for several years. I didn't have any play in my life. And to me, that speaks to how wounded somebody is, because the less play in your life, the more wounded that person is, because that wounding creates those layers of protection those compensations and defensive behaviors and, the need to, not the enjoyment of having a glass of wine after work, but the need to have a glass of wine over work. There is a difference. And so if you have that need, what are you protecting versus what are you expressing?
yes.
Yeah.
Bessel van der Kolk in Body Keeps the Score talks about some correlation between imagination and trauma.
Mm-hmm.
That with deep, extensive trauma, we cannot even access imagination.
Right. And our imagination goes to the story we tell ourselves, and it gets projected out at other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
which is really telling about how traumatized America is.
That's why I am becoming a trauma therapist, because I want my nephews to grow up in a safer place. I want everybody's kiddos. I want us to grow up.
Yes.
Whatever age we're at, I want us to grow up in a healthier place.
Absolutely.
I'm so deeply devoted to trauma work. And bringing it back to psychedelic medicines, psychedelics heal us so quick.
Yes.
Let me rephrase that. Our innate healer, when catalyzed by psychedelic medicines, can produce transformation so quickly.
Yes.
And I want to plug something that I find very important.
Mm-hmm.
It is the relationship between the psychedelic therapist and the client that creates the healing. It is the juxtaposition of their innate healer, them feeling safe, and the medicine's catalyzing process. But I think in psychedelic therapy, the two most important parts are working with a therapist, that relational piece, somebody who understands the nervous system, the body, who understands modeling healthy relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so psychedelics can be inherently healing, but I don't want to send out the message that everybody should go out and do drugs today. It is that specific relationship that I find integral.
Yes, and I'm totally with you. From my own experience with my own treatments, I am not a proponent of recreational use at all.
Yeah, it's tricky because I feel in full support of cognitive liberty, meaning that in a post-prohibitionist world, people should be allowed to consume the substances that they want.
Mm-hmm.
I do try to hold a really radical standpoint that even demonized substances with a healthier context would have a place in culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that people are allowed to do whatever they want, but it's the prohibition and the institutional systems that actually create the issue.
Mm-hmm.
I feel really lucky enough. I feel lucky enough to live with an individual who works for, have you heard of DanceSafe?
No, I haven't.
DanceSafe they're a nonprofit. They're excellent. They promote harm reduction in the nightlife scene. And I've been learning a lot from her about actually using my voice and forming opinions on drug prohibition. She's walking by as I'm talking about her, about drug prohibition. And that so to circle back, I hold the radical belief that drugs aren't the problem. It's the way that culture is treating them that is the problem.
Yes.
But I think that the medical model deserves a lot of attention in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not for psychedelic elitism, which is an expression that I also heard from her, meaning that psychedelics are good and things like methamphetamine and heroin and opiates are inherently bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm neutral. I'm neutral on a lot of substances.
Yeah.
I'm not personally partaking, but
yeah.
I just think the medical model could produce a lot of healing quickly.
Mm-hmm.
To circle back.
Absolutely. Well, after doing some of my research into the history of opioids and just the history of drugs and the history of the drug war, and if anybody out there is interested in doing research, a fantastic place to start is with Johann Hari's work. He wrote Chasing the Scream, and he also has a TED Talk called Everything You Think You Know About Addiction is Wrong. And he's right. Everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. He's absolutely right on that. And, and I recently, it was actually at a MAPS, the Cultural Community Workshop in Louisville, Kentucky. Dr. Carl Hart spoke. And when the information that Dr. Hart presented was right in alignment with what Johann Hari reports in his book.
I was going to bring up Dr. Carl Hart, people like Dr. Carl Hart and Monica Williams. Did you work?
Yes, I heard her speak as well. Trying to connect with her. I'd love to have her on here too.
She is somebody that I have so much reverence for.
Yeah, she's phenomenal. Yeah. But there's so much misinformation and propaganda and myth about the drugs that they're horribly misunderstood. They're horribly misused. And when people start to self-administer is when things tend to go off the rails. And one of the reasons I personally am not in favor of recreational use is the people I know, and maybe in other parts of the country this is different, but the people I know who use recreationally are not tending to set and setting in a way that I would feel safe participating.
Yeah, that gets into some really interesting territory of what defines recreational then.
Yeah.
So for example, if I was to I live in a city where psilocybin is decriminalized, which is wild. That's very new to me, very wild. If I was to, choose to consume psilocybin in the city and the intention was set, I was safe in my home, I had a sitter, could that still be considered recreational because I'm not working with a therapist? Like, there are these edges of, what if for somebody their church is going to a venue and dancing, you know, on medicine. Like, let's say for somebody that is church, that is where they can be with their own body and trust themselves and be free, you know? So that's, for me, where the recreation boundary gets a little tricky, because it's like, well,
yeah,
people are still receiving healing. So it's not that everybody needs a therapist to heal. I think that in cultural contexts where shamanism was more present, it does make sense that that was the person that you went to receive healing. This person was appointed by their community to be in a place of healing. But our culture is so far from that to put the power in a therapist to be somewhat of a shaman, I think I don't personally align with. And if people do, like, all the respect for them, but as a white European Jewish woman who's a second generation American, my boundaries around shamanism are, I just don't identify with that in my therapeutic practice. So I don't think you need to have a therapist to heal, but I think I'm rambling a little bit.
Yeah, I'm okay with the shaman, and I'm okay with having a sitter, because again, you're really putting attention to set and setting.
Is that the boundary for you of what makes
that is a huge boundary for me, is set and setting. Like, I am totally not okay with just like going to festivals and just partaking of whatever in whatever setting with whomever. I know people do that. Good on you. That's not my thing. I'm not going to participate.
Yeah.
I need a safer container, and I need a little bit of trust with the person I'm with. I've had so much mistrust built up in my life that if I'm going to heal that, I can't go in with mistrust.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think for me as a therapist, I've chosen the stance of anybody could sit in front of me and tell me about their drug use, and they are like loved and accepted.
Yeah, same here.
I do not care if you're recreationally using anything. If you are underlying wanting to heal whatever medicines are helping you cope with, there's no judgment from me.
Yeah.
And but I do really respect the stance of holding firm for, it sounds like you're modeling for your community, for your listeners, that there is a lot of benefit in this strictness, in this discipline of doing these medicines ritualistically.
Yeah. I believe that. I don't expect everybody to believe what I believe, but I absolutely believe that the ceremony and the ritual of it can be really, really powerful.
It's integral. Ritual is just making the invisible visible, which, art is ritual, psychedelics is ritual.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Alyssa, we have a few minutes left. So before we wrap up, so we still have a little bit of time, but before we wrap up, I don't want to put you on the spot. Like, give our listeners the best way to follow you or reach out to you online.
I love talking to people. I love building relationships. I love communicating. So I'm an open book. My Instagram handle, if people use that platform, it is Abundance of Liss. So ABUNDANCE OF LYSS.
Okay.
That is me, and my website is Psychedelic Art Therapy.
Okay. And that's .com.
Yep. Psychedelicarttherapy.com, and the email psychedelicarttherapy at gmail.com is a great way to reach me.
Okay.
2 T's in art and therapy. So I don't need to spell that one out. I'm on Facebook. Instagram's a great way to follow me. I post a lot of my art on there, a lot of my therapeutic art.
Okay.
A lot about ketamine. That's mostly the medicines that I work with right now, are ketamine and cannabis. So yes, I am open. I love supporting people and figuring out how to get involved in psychedelic spaces. If people have questions about creative practices, those are two avenues that are really important to me. And I'm in the process of figuring out how to market myself as an integration support.
Mm-hmm.
I dream of supporting folks in using art to support integration, because that's what I'm piloting at Innate Path right now.
Yeah. And art and just any type of expressive therapy is so important. Again, almost circling back to where we started, movement is a great way to work some of those issues out of the implicit mind, that tissue memory. And art, like whenever it's coming through, whether it's writing or, pastels or paint or clay, sculpture, whatever form that is, there's subconscious combined in there too. So it's not just implicit or, so these nonverbal parts of ourselves, the implicit mind and the subconscious mind, can express themselves through the art. And I love that so much.
Yeah, thanks for reflecting that back. All expressive therapies.
Yeah, and it's so important for healing, because the nonverbal parts of us will never heal with words alone. It's just not possible.
Exactly, right brain stuff, working with that nonverbal piece is humongous. Mm-hmm. And I cannot stress enough that in difficult times, taking the time to make art is so valuable. It is a gift to your future self when you can track on paper your process.
Yeah.
Absolutely, just witnessing symbols transform. Even if you think you're making the same image every day, it is different. Mm-hmm. And looking for the ways that it's slightly different, just tracking your growth, it is such a way to say to your body, like, I'm here with you. I am here with you. I am not abandoning you.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And to, just again, what happens when we don't let the body know we're here?
It runs rampant.
Yeah.
Worries, and the world becomes a more selfishly motivated place, I think.
Yeah.
Out of fear.
A lot of dysfunction comes when we don't pay attention to the body.
Yeah. Oh, major.
Yeah. Well, Alyssa, before we sign off, do you have any final tips or bits of wisdom to leave with our listeners today?
Laugh so much. Just laughter is such a great way to move things. That has been my lesson of the week, is any pocket that you can find laughter, appreciate and create. Just, there is so much waiting for you underneath the surface, and taking the time to listen. That is the message that I wish to share. And that if anybody is listening, I love you.
Absolutely. Thank you
for anyone supporting.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. It's been a pleasure to have you on today.
Yes, this has been a lovely conversation. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Yeah, this was wonderful. We'll have to plan that. Yeah, and for all of our listeners, you've been listening to Alyssa Gursky, and I'm Jennifer Whitaker, empowerment strategist. If you are interested in finding out more information about me, you can look me up at jenniferwhitaker.com, and I will see all of you next week on Yes And.
We have just concluded another episode of the Yes And podcast with Jennifer Whitaker. For additional resources, please visit our website, jenniferwhitaker.com. Leave a review if you enjoyed the show and find it useful. Until next time, continue challenging conventional thinking and keep moving forward.